You can tell her anything. She's a real good listener. You can tell her anything.
Yo, what's up, confidant? It's your girl, Father Longlegs, Daddy T. You know me. Okay, here's another episode of You Can Tell Me Anything. This is the quarantine edition, as you are well aware, where we've really been just going off the rails, but I actually think we've been, in a way, more informative than when we were just joking around about confessions, which were also important. Clearly, I took my Adderall this morning. Okay, so let's get into it. I want to introduce my guest, a super funny comedian. I think he used to be out here in LA because I remember one time we did karaoke together. But recently, he did my Instagram live stream, and I found out he's very into politics and dissecting. I don't even want to call it conspiracy because it's funny to call it that. But most of the time when I'm looking at this stuff, it's like facts. But he shares a common interest with me, and he has a podcast called Pod Damn America, and he's very funny on Twitter at Feral Jokes. Please welcome Jake Flores.
Hey, thanks for having me. I forgot we did karaoke. I never lived in LA, but before COVID was just like I took like mega buses everywhere and did comedy like that, so I would just be in LA a lot. And now not so much.
Wow. I thought you were going to say mega bus to LA, and I was like, that is, because you're in New York. I hope it's okay if I say that. It's weird, like with comedy, we're allowed to just say where we live in a broad sense, but sometimes people get too comfortable and start talking about neighborhoods, and I'm like, well, don't do that. Don't tell people what cross
honestly,
street I live on.
I have a lot of people on the internet don't like me because I get into political stuff, and that's kind of comes with the territory. And like, I think at this point, people just know where I live. Like, it's just. It's going to happen. Somebody wants to, egg my house or whatever. They can come find it.
I guess in New York it's a little different, too, because it's just, you could literally say I live off the subway stop and I would have no idea where you lived. But, talking about conspiracy. So my way into all this was a really roundabout way, which is I started researching AI because of a pilot, which is not noble at all. None of this was for political clout. None of this was for, I like to say I'm trying to save democracy as a joke, but the truth is I wasn't, I'm not being motivated from a good place. I need to be clear with everyone that I'm not a good person trying to save democracy. I don't want anyone to think, what is she trying to do? I just started researching a pilot about a sex robot turned therapist and got really into AI a few years ago and generally like bots. So the technology has kind of caught up where it's, actively being used in the political sphere. And now that we're in a pandemic and I have more time, I've definitely merged the two interests of just generally wanting the world to be better and also my knowledge from researching bots and technology. And that's kind of merged with the political world in a weird way. So that's the loose background of how I got into this. Why don't you tell us a little bit about why you're interested in this? I know you've kind of been talking about this from before quarantine, right?
Yeah. Wow, that's really interesting that your doorway into this was just reading about AI for comedy stuff. But, that's usually how it goes. Like, what are the things that motivate people in society? Usually it has to do with careers or, something eventually that'll become a job or something like that. That's honestly for me, I'm pretty into history and politics and sort of left-wing activism and stuff like that. But I mean, honestly, make a similar argument. I think for me, one thing that really was very radicalizing was simply being a comedian and then Trump getting elected. Because to me at that point, I thought if you're a comedian, you either have to quit comedy or do a lot of research and try to understand what was going on in the world, because what you're doing as a comic is commenting on society a lot of the times. And that election just clearly showed all of us, we don't know what the hell we're talking about. Nobody predicted that, We all kind of thought it wasn't going to happen. And so for me, I thought, all right, time to go hit the books and then maybe improve my worldview so that I could actually write jokes about this that aren't just pandering to to dead-ended conspiracy theories or whatever. You talk about conspiracy theories a lot. And I think that a lot of people do kind of think of me as one of those one of those guys in comedy who's like, everyone's a sheeple or whatever, but I'm actually very anti-conspiracy theory.
Yes.
I think that they are sort of useful for keeping people satiated, and they're anti-material analysis. So I'm a big Marx guy. I'm a big commie, right? And I'm into analyzing the world through, what would be referred to as historical materialism, which is very complicated sort of way of saying, like, looking at what you can actually measure rather than what conspiracy theories do, which is conspiracy theories, you make a lot of assumptions, I guess,
Sure. Well, that's what I've been learning more as I've dug into this, is how skillful and crafty. I don't want to just call it the right. I guess I'll call them the extreme right, because that's part of it. Part of this, there is a group that's been pushing this. I don't know how much we'll get into that really, because it really does sound like I'm talking about a deep state, which I'm not. But there are, powerful lobbyists, so let's just leave it at that, who want us to feel like the entire right is against us, which is not true. So I fall into the trap when I even use that term, because I have Republican friends who I would consider, or they might consider themselves on the right, but when I say extreme right, I'm not talking about them. So I'm falling into this trap as well. But yeah, that's a skill they use, conspiracies, to get us to question everything, right? They say things like, you don't know the truth, question everything. But you do know some truths. It's not just because you found out one thing in your life. Like, let's say you got cheated on. That can make you feel like in a day that nothing you know is true. It feels like the rug getting pulled out. But some things are true. The sky is still blue. Like, you're probably still going to have to eat food in the next few days, even if you don't want to, or you'll die. Like, there's truths that remain.
Liberal conspiracy. I do not eat.
Okay, true.
I'm powered by the sun.
Soros might, not send that check over for your food.
Yeah.
But that's how they get you, is they get the vulnerabilities of people who already are questioning their reality, and then they go, well, if that's not true, what else is not true? And then they have you hooked. So I agree with you. Conspiracies are actually a weapon, and when we talk about truth, it's pointing to facts, but they sound as crazy as conspiracy, so people lump them into one group.
Here's what I think it is, right? I think it's pretty simple, and it has to do with the fact that America is so capitalist, right? Yeah, right. And that's what makes it great, right? Is that we worship money, right? Mm-hmm. And so it goes against everything American to really question that. Maybe that's not the most perfect system in the world, is to, our God is, the dollar, and that rich people are considered the best people in society. So here's what I think is going on with a lot of conspiracy theories, right? It's pretty simple. Well, rich people control everything, and they don't want you understanding that they're our enemy, so they come up with all these other enemies, right? So, like, on the right, you got Trump. He's looking at... Everyone says this about him. Oh, he's got his right-wing, working class, populist people, right? And, like, I think it's a little more complicated than that. Like, a lot of people that like Trump are actually very middle class, or even upper class, right? But there are a lot of angry working class people in America, and what does he do? He goes around and he says, hey, your life sucks. You're angry. You don't make enough money. You know whose fault it is? It's Mexicans, right? But it's like, it's not Mexicans, it's rich people. Rich people are the reason nobody has any damn money, because they hoard all the money, And, I mean, kind of the same thing happens, I'd say, on the other side, too. This is why I'm like, there's no point in arguing left wing, right wing here. It's poor versus rich, in my opinion, is really what's going on. And then they just sort of use both of those sides to keep, various people kind of fighting with each other. But, like, on the other side, too, here's the thing. This is an unpopular opinion, and you don't have to go with me on this, because not a lot of people do in the world of comedy. But I think all the Russiagate stuff, also conspiracy theory stuff. And it's... to me, it seems like a really convenient way of kind of not addressing the reasons that, when I say we, I mean, I voted Democrat, last time around. The Democrats lost the damn election to Trump, right? Because, I mean, there's reasons. It's all this deep-seated structural stuff, racism, sexism, but they're going, no. It was spooky Russians. And then, like, I mean, have you ever met anybody that's, like, really, really into that stuff? They go off on a whole You know,
Yeah.
they're like, it's very tinfoil hatty. It's kind of the same thing in my opinion.
This is actually really interesting you brought that up, because I would say I'm kind of like in a weird position with this. So I agree with you, and right after the election I was like, all right, let go of this Russia thing. And I looked into some of it, and the dossier or whatever, all that. When all these docs were coming out, I like tried to understand. And to be fair, at the time I didn't feel as threatened in my very fabric of life, so I didn't try that hard to understand it, and I just thought, the people in charge will figure it out. And
it was fun. I remember like, ooh, Russian conspiracy. Like, it was fun for a minute.
Well, so I think this is where I am now, and you may disagree, but I just wanted to give my background so you know I didn't start from like wanting to blame Russia, and I still don't blame Russia, to be fair. But I talked about this on the last pod where I interviewed this author who actually did a lot of research, and I asked her just point blank, because I was like, as a comedian, I'm not a journalist, can I just ask you what's your thought on Russia? And she said she's a journalist. She can't make any conclusions without proof. But every time she was researching the book, she just kept tripping over Russia connections. But that doesn't, like you said, assumptions, right? That doesn't imply there's a real motivation, or that there is not defense mechanisms in America to combat that. Of course, other countries are always trying to get to us. That's like base knowledge of every intelligence agency. Doesn't mean they've succeeded. So that's where I am now. Is I'm not saying that we're at a threat of being taken over by Russia. But in more of my recent research, I've definitely found more alarming direct ties to the White House and government that imply that we may be working closer with Russia than feels safe. So from where I stand, I just hope to God you guys know what you're doing and in this game, and you're not letting them get the leg up, because you both have your reasons for working with each other. And, you know, when you partner with someone who's also trying to take advantage of you, like, obviously we're probably trying to take advantage of them too. So I hope they're competent enough. It doesn't mean I think they are literally being run by Russia, but it does provide a higher risk when they're that close, is more where I stand.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a good point. I should also say this, since I made my whole point about Russia or whatever, is like, I'm not saying that nothing happened, right? Clearly there's like stuff going on there, and Trump has all these shady deals. So it would be equally foolish to be a complete hardcore conspiracy theorist about this as it would to be like, nothing has ever happened between Russia and Trump. I think what's more important to me is understanding, like, when the person running for president on the Democratic side just tells you, you know, we don't need to fix anything we did last time because the only reason that happened last time was Russia. Like, the narrative is what's important to me here. So it's interesting. There's material reality. There's things that actually happened, but then there's like the narrative, the media, the stories we tell to explain away things. That stuff is very interesting to me because, like, I mean, you're right. Like, of course, Russia is trying to do stuff with our elections. I mean,
but we do that to every. I mean, to be fair,
we do that. Right?
Every big country, meddles in every other country's election. They don't always succeed.
We're actively doing it right now.
Yes.
We just did it in Bolivia, and we've tried to overthrow Venezuela like 4 times.
We're awful. We're actually one of the worst for USA is number 1 at oppressing and putting in terrorist regimes and calling it democracy. But you know, that's neither here nor there. But every country does do a version of that. So yeah, I see what you're saying. It's like, I prefer looking at facts over feelings, right? Just because someone's trying to, well, I always try to break it down on relationships, because originally this podcast started from just the idea of therapy and looking at the self. And I think you can broaden that out to the government. But like, if you're in a stable relationship and, you know, and someone who really doesn't want to see you happy is really coming for your man or your woman or whatever, you know, your partner, and they really are trying to home wreck, that doesn't mean that it will succeed. But yes, that can be quite annoying.
That doesn't mean that you also don't need to fix shit around your own house, right?
Exactly. These are all separate things. It can be true that someone is actively trying to home wreck. It can also be true that your relationship is strong. It could also be independently true that your relationship is weak. You know, these are all possible. And it's also valid to be annoyed that they're trying to home wreck. Like, I think we get so focused on feeling powerless. Like, if we knew Russia was actively trying to ruin our election, of course the reaction isn't to do nothing. Like, you can be frustrated, you could be annoyed, but then it's also what is in your control is to, tighten up democracy and your country and what you stand for and come together and show that, sorry, you guys want, you want my man, you can't have him. So you want my democracy, you can't have him,
Right.
So I don't know. I know that's a very dumb metaphor, and, that's my brand, just being a dumb
I like
bitch.
it.
But
I like the metaphor of Russia as a seductress, sultry, a tart, I guess, a harlot.
But there's like ways. So this is where I become radical, and I don't even think I am. But somehow, just by existing as like a queer person of color in Hollywood, trying to get in Hollywood, if we're being honest, is radical by existence. And I don't even consider myself that. I think I'm normal because that's my point of view. So what I would say to that is, based on my experience, if that were true, it also doesn't mean the goal is to not get your partner to cheat or sleep. Like, there's so many routes you can go with that depending on your beliefs and views. Like, if I was in a situation where I was like, this person that you clearly find attractive but you're not going to sleep with is actively trying to sleep with you, and they're not going to stop, and we've agreed, and if I'm communicative and honest, like, there maybe is a world, if I'm comfortable, where I say, do you want to just fuck her, like, to get her out of here? Do you want that? Like, not everyone has the capability and emotional, bandwidth to do that. And to be honest, I don't know if I would either. But I'm just saying there's other options, right? The other option isn't just to keep fighting back. There's an option where you go, what do you want? What do I want? I want her to leave us alone, and I know that you'll be with me whether you fuck her or not. Do you want to just fuck her? There's like ways around it, is what I'm trying to say. It's not so black and white, or it's not just capitalism versus fascism versus what they would like us to think is social.
It calls it a question. What is our conflict with like something like Russia or like other states? What are we even doing? Why do we have states that are in competition with each other?
Why don't we just focus on making this country great? And then maybe Russia wants to be part of it, and we're like, oh, here's the legal immigration process. Come on and join in and become an American. Like, there's other ways. I'm not saying that we should take over Russia. I'm just saying, if they're trying so hard to take us over, is there a world where we're like, hey, we're pretty great, but come on in, just do it the legal way?
Well, see, then I think you're getting into like actually big picture stuff, which is, a part of this. It's weird because Russia's like we already took it over and installed capitalism in Russia. So it's another capitalist state. We're not in a Cold War anymore, which was, fighting between two.
Yeah, the USSR is over.
We're not. A lot of people still use the.
But we don't know that
communist
Americans
imagery
don't
with
know
them.
that.
It's like, no, they're like us. We literally made that. We put Starbucks and McDonald's and shit over there, and made a bunch of rich people rich, or a bunch of powerful people rich or whatever over there, and then set it up like that. So it's weird that we're in competition with them. But I guess what you're saying, this metaphor about opening this up to like a polycule, I think is actually a good metaphor for like, it could be like Trotskyist world communism, but I think more what we would do, what the American government would do to get along with Russia and then have them leave us alone is like probably some sort of like healthy trade, where we wouldn't really be in some sort of situation where what's even the conflict between our governments, really? I mean, I guess.
Well, there's a lot of, I think, oil, to be honest. It's like you said, money. There's a lot of struggle for the biggest GDP, and and here's where I talk beyond my knowledge, so feel free to at me and call me a dumb bitch, but I believe Russia, Saudi Arabia, and U.S. kind of have, like, oil wars that they struggle with. So, not struggle, but they're, head-to-head. So I think...
Competing, yeah.
Yeah, so I think Russia and us, like sanctions and all that, we say it's in the name of human rights, but then we've got human rights issues at home and we don't care about them. So yes, on one hand, from a UN point of view, yeah, we should be harsh on China and Russia until they, address their human rights issues. But if that is really our goal, why are we not addressing our own human rights issues?
Now you're getting it, right? The narrative, it doesn't really make any sense. They're telling you like the story of one thing, like, oh, it's about human rights, when it's actually about competition to grow our like, our GDP or whatever. But it doesn't make any sense because, oil is sooner or later going to run out and it's destroying the world, And at some point, we're going to have to switch to something that there's not going to be like a scarce quantity of, so there's no reason to compete over it. So at some point, the end of this, if there were like an international version of the Green New Deal, it would be to take the competitive nature out of this and just have us all work together to set up like renewable energy sources. But that'll never happen because and I think
billionaires.
we might have read some similar shit about this. But have you ever read Dark Money by Jane Meyer?
No, but it's been referenced in some of the. So I read the Ann Nelson book about Shadow Network, and she's references like Li Fang, and I know you said you guys are friends online,
Right.
so there's definitely crossover in that world. It's a small world of people actually trying to dig this up, and the info's out there, but it's very dense. I will say I don't blame anyone for not knowing this.
It's very boring.
And I barely understand it, but now that I'm starting to, I want everyone to, and I realize like nobody has the time or energy, and I may also be doing this as a way to cope. We're all driven by our needs. And yeah, like if all your needs are met, you're not going to feel like you need anything. And that's the truth. Russia maybe has needs that we could also help address, and then they wouldn't be so actively antagonizing us. But
Well, certainly the people of Russia, because when we talk about Russia, we think about like, Putin or whatever, but it's like, that's just the guy that's running shit over there. There are 99% of people in America and 99% of people in Russia have more in common with each other than
Yes.
we don't. But it's
Yeah.
just the goddamn people in charge are running everything. And the people in charge, I'll tell you this, we kind of got to it when we started talking about oil, right? All this stuff that motivates our government that we think they tell us, it's about making the world a better place and make people, spreading freedom or whatever. It's actually about that damn oil. And the thing about oil is that it's historically been owned by the most like hardcore, almost anarcho-capitalist people in all of the history of the earth, which is, the Koch brothers and all that sort of shit. Dark Money is a really good book because it goes into the origins of where those fuckers even came from.
is it about the Koch network?
Yeah, it's
Okay.
about the Kochtopus is what it's called.
gotcha.
Like, you see those old political cartoons with the tentacles everywhere. But there's people in that world that like, it's not an accident that they're like this. Like, there's this guy William Lefebvre. He's one of my favorite characters in all of the history of capitalism. Who he was in a cult called the Church of Theosophy that like a bunch of our modern spooky Aleister Crowley stuff comes out of, and they used to have like rituals where they would chant and try to kill Franklin Delano Roosevelt with their minds and like curse him and shit. This is where all this stuff comes from, right? It's really interesting. That's why I kind of got into it, because you're right. There's nothing we can do about it. It's just I'm reading this stuff and trying to feel like I have some sort of control over the world. But yeah, I mean, it's crazy people.
That's what I do every morning in my yoga class. I didn't know that was a problem, but I guess I'll be unsubscribing to that.
Well, he's
YouTube.
dead now, so I guess it doesn't matter.
Oh no, it worked. No, I know what you're saying. It's weird. Wait, can I interject just because I wanted to say something? But when you mentioned this guy coming from a cult, this is my like overall hypothesis and I try to not make assumptions because I want to just talk about facts. But because this is my podcast and I'm a comedian, I will make assumptions in my podcast. But I'm letting you know it's one, so think for yourself. My hypotheses about all of this on a big level, on a small level, like why people abuse or manipulate, is because of on some level there's trauma and there's some need that they're not filling, and if you have power and money, then you can continually try to fill it the wrong way and nobody will stop you, right? So in fact, you may draw in more people who you can abuse who think that you're filling their needs, blah, 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 pyramid schemes, we see that. But you bringing up cult totally illustrates that. And again, I've done no scientific research, so I might be off base, but the gut feeling to me there is someone who can be easily manipulated into feeling like they belong or have power when they feel powerless for whatever trauma they have will continue that cycle as they get older. And if it works for them and it goes unchecked, they will just continue exponentially abusing that power. And that kind of speaks to that as well.
I think so. I mean, it's interesting because there's material arguments to be made about the fact that some people have more money than other people. Like, it just shouldn't happen. Things shouldn't be set up that way. But there is also this inner world stuff that we talk about, right? There's one of my favorite philosophers I'm kind of stuck on is Gilles Deleuze. I'm reading a lot about right now. He's sort of
who is it?
figured out.
Wait, can you
He's
say
this
that
crazy
again?
Gilles Deleuze,
Okay.
crazy French guy who sort of understood the world to be like viewable through two lenses, right? The Marxist and the Freudian. So Marx tells you the entire world can be understood to be like material. So all the things that happen to you that affect things and that shape your experience come from without. They are other things that happen to you. Then Freud kind of makes the opposite, where everything comes from within. Everything that motivates you in your life is, your Oedipus and you want to have sex with your parents and all this weird shit, and right?
Which
and
has been disproven, that part. Like that part, the Freudian complex, has been disproven in the field. Like the idea that all kids want to have sex with their parents, but that
Freud is not very popular in psychology. I was a psych student in college before I dropped out.
No, but I bring that up not to just to further highlight what you're saying about how we reference things. And because we are so used to these symbols, like I forget, it goes back to something you were saying earlier, and I don't remember exactly the way you said it, but the feeling was you say it like you know it, but there's no facts. Like we all know in psychology it's been disproven, yet we still bring up the Freudian complex in our day-to-day language as if it's a thing but it's not. It's been disproven. It's just a thing that some people have, but it's not like a thing that everyone has, but we still talk about it like it is, even though science has evolved.
Freud's funny, I think, because he is important because he came first. He was the first person to really bring back the idea in new industrialized society and developed society, to bring back and to make scientific the idea that there's like an inner world that's complicated and abstract inside people. And that's a thing that like people hadn't really talked about since there were like shamans and stuff, right? But the thing is, since he was the first guy, he was the worst at it. So all of his explanations are crazy. None of it makes any sense. He's a weird old pervert and stuff, right? The only thing that's really important
you can dissect it to make sense, but it's not word for word making sense. Like there's ideas in it. Yeah.
I would describe him as taking artistic license. Like he had a little
poet.
fun with his theories, right? Yeah, he's more of an artist, right? But anyway, I think that's interesting. This inner world, outer world thing. A lot of Americans, since we are part of this country that waged this very highly propagandized war against communism and socialism, we're very anti-Marxist. So we're very anti the material explanation, and that's why everyone doesn't understand that rich people control everything. Because like you have to be a Marxist to understand that. You have to think materially. But what we do have here in America, everyone's really kind of a Freudian, especially out in California where you guys are, all the woo-woo crystals and stuff. Everyone is like very into the inner world. So we sometimes I forget, because I'm so into the material stuff, I forget to think about that stuff. And I was bringing this back to your point you were making about rich people. They're deeply sick inside. When you did you see those people the other day in St. Louis who were like defending their mansion with like a assault rifle and a handgun? It was weird middle-aged couple. Being
on comedy Twitter is so weird because I only saw jokes about it, and sometimes I bother to look it up. So like there's another joke I saw about I know a spot, and I was just like, I don't even care where this is from. I'm not even gonna bother. This one will come and go within a few days. But I saw the jokes. I didn't see the original story. I could have looked it up. I just gathered based on the jokes. I've gotten to a point where I don't like there's something that kind of makes me a little bit sick of us finding glee in shaming people, because now that I've kind of see a lot of these bad behaviors are driven by, it's inner and outer world, but the trauma, like shaming someone who disagrees with you, to me on a human level makes me feel a little bit bad. Like it's not helping me get where I want to go. And it's also negative. It's actively adding negative value to my world when I shame someone else, even if I disagree with them. So I've kind of held off on things like that. Like I'll still make jokes when I feel like they're my point of view, but I don't really like pointing out just strangers and how dumb they are. I don't know. I'm changing every day.
Yeah.
Like I feel like I'm sure you could find an example of me doing that in the past. I just feel a little conflicted now doing that.
I mean, yeah, it's weird. It's weird that we kind of have this ritual human sacrifice thing going on the internet where everyone's like, bloodthirsty and no one realizes, that could be me tomorrow. But me personally, with like, I think it's okay to be that mean to people that are in really high positions of power, because no one's that ever going to be mean to them, and they kind of live in a world like Trump. Like it's okay to be that mean to Trump.
Yeah,
right?
it's like the
He's
punching
probably
up
the
rule.
worst person, and he's unrepentant and mean and evil about it. So if we weren't mean to him, he would probably just think he's doing a great job, right?
It's like the punching up, punching down rule in comedy. And I guess I don't know. I assume that couple was just like a random couple. I didn't recognize them as like anyone powerful or famous, and that's why I didn't look. But there was another one that was clearly just a random person, a Karen as the internet calls her, just a white middle-aged woman in a Trader Joe's in North Hollywood, and people were sharing her breakdown because she wouldn't wear a mask. And I don't agree with people not wearing masks, but that's a separate issue than spreading a video of someone's actual breakdown, because to me, I'm like, that's not punching up. I don't know what's going on in her life. I can only imagine, like, everybody's stressed out right now, and to have a breakdown in a grocery store in front of strangers, you can't be in a good place. Whether or not I agree with your politics, whether or not you've murdered someone, like I, as someone who doesn't want to hurt anyone, don't find glee in making fun of someone's mental breakdown. And so that's where I draw the line. But yes, if Trump, our president, was having a breakdown on TV, I would be like, sharing it to be like, maybe he's not fit to be our leader. And I think he should get help, but I don't think he should be our leader. So it's a little bit different in that situation if I'm making fun of him, because that's almost like commenting to get people to see the truth, to get him out of office. And then he should still get help. I don't think we should dump him in the ocean, but we should definitely make sure he can't hurt anyone. But that's where I stand.
If Trump didn't have any money, and he wasn't president, and he wasn't in, all these things are the things that make it a problem, right? He's affecting other people with his wealth and his power and his job and his government and shit. He didn't have any of that stuff. He would be great, I think. Like, he'd be like a fun...
I don't know, because look at, I know a ton of open micers who act like that, and they still wreak havoc, and they get nowhere and have no resources. So there's tons of abuse in comedy world, and I would say that's the extreme opposite of having no power, yet a lot of delusion. And I'm not excusing myself from criticism. I constantly say, please cancel me if you want, but I have no career to cancel, so therefore it doesn't matter. So this is all so interesting. I want to like pare it down a bit just so we don't get too, because I know there's so much. You have an entire podcast about this, and I could talk for hours. So let's like make it more specific so we can focus. You say you're a Marxist. I'm assuming you've read up a lot about that sort of thing. That's an element I've never really gotten too into, and I would say probably as a result of propaganda, me staying away from communism, and me being a Chinese American, even more so anti-communist. For the record, in case anyone's that racist or ignorant, Chinese people are not all communists. The Chinese government right now is being run by communists, but I'm from Free China or whatever. So I've always kind of stayed away from that. But can you maybe like break down, why don't you like tell us maybe a few ideas? I'm not going to give you a number because it's not like actual school, but more specific ideas that are concrete from Marxism that you like, that you feel like are maybe people misunderstand.
Yes. And before I do, I kind of want to talk to what you're talking about with China, because it's communism's a dirty word in America. And it's also, especially if you're from China or something like that, it's really dicey to talk about. And I don't want you to think that I'm like a pro-Chinese government communist.
I know.
I think what's going on in China is bad, but it's not like communism. It's like this.
It's not. Thing. No, it's capitalism. They're both fascist. Wait, because I am curious. You said you know a lot about history and you like it. What do you know about the Chinese Civil War? Have you read about that at all, or are you in? It's okay to say no. I only recently really got way more into it, and I was surprised that so little Americans know about it.
So, honestly, like, China's the next big thing that I really want to learn a lot about, and I don't think that I'm really qualified to speak that from a place of authority on it. A lot of this stuff became interesting to me because my mom's white, is why I'm all pale, but my dad's Mexican, so I'm from Latin American, background and stuff. And there's a lot of there are a lot of expatriates from Latin American countries where there's similar stuff going on. Like half of them hate communism and think it's the worst thing ever because a lot of those are rich people who like got all their stuff taken away, and then there's a lot of people who like love it but they never get represented because they still live in Cuba or whatever.
Well, there's also false socialism, like Maduro, right? I feel like was under the guise of. There's just a lot of Americans spinning the narrative, like you said, into saying like this is fascism, this is socialism, when it's all just different shades of tyrannical governments. Yeah.
Important kind of baseline thing to understand is that like nowhere on earth really has 100% properly executed communism or capitalism. We all just live in like these permutations of it playing out a certain way.
Yeah. So
even America is like not, even if it says it's the most capitalist place in the world, well it's not like that all the way extreme. So here's what I'm getting at. I wanted to make a distinction.
Yeah.
There are people, if you get into this side of Twitter and these weird circles and these activist circles and stuff, you'll meet what's called a tankie. You ever heard that term?
No.
Okay, so there's people who basically I think you're born, they're raised in America, taught all the propaganda. Then maybe you get out of high school and you read like a Howard Zinn book and you realize a lot of it was bullshit, and there are some elements from socialism that are pretty good or whatever. And then what they do is they make this big false assumption, which is, well, everything America's ever done must be bad, and everything every communist government's ever done must be good, right? And then you become like you're in your early 20s and you're walking around with the Che shirt and the hat, all that shit. And those people are dumb too. I am not one of those people. I'm someone who thinks that a better world is possible and it doesn't exist yet.
Yes.
I don't think that Russia nailed it or anything like that.
They're not done. I love that you brought that up. And I barely, again, if you just even go back into my old tweets or podcast, probably from even like 2 months ago, I'm sure I'm calling people stupid all the time. So you can hear me actively growing and also getting actively unfunnier, which is very frustrating for myself, but also whatever. But like for me to be like, you know what, they're not dumb, but if we were all in a good place, I would say they are dumb, but only because I'm trying to reach out to people like that. The reason I don't think they're dumb, I think they're vulnerable. I think that's what it is. I think because what you talked about, it's similar to what I've been noticing in the way the extreme right, I want to say brainwash, that's how it feels, indoctrinates, I will say, ideas. It's almost cult-like. So they start like how Scientology, which we all kind of actively agree is, culty, with a stress test, something simple where you feel seen and you maybe find out one or two things that you suspected weren't real aren't. And then, like you say, they make a very big assumption. But at that point, you're hooked because if you're vulnerable and you've never felt like someone's heard you or seen you your entire life, or maybe you've never felt love, right? Like these are things that everyone needs, but you didn't address. And all of a sudden, a group tells you it's all going to be okay. They make you feel loved. They make you feel safe. They make you feel powerful. Yeah, you're going to go along with everything they say. So these are all different shades of the same sort of pattern of abuse where someone takes you in and, maybe gives you a little bit of truth and then gives you a whopping lie.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. What all of these things are is just simply put an explanation, right? Because most people, you just kind of have a hollow thing in the middle of you and you're like, why do I feel so bad all the time? Then you accidentally walk into the Scientologist building. Next thing you know, you spent the next 10 years of your life doing that shit or whatever. Or you become like one of those Trump psychos. It's like, the reason my life sucks so much is because of the immigrants or whatever. Mm-hmm. All these are just explanations for why do I feel so bad,
why
right?
you can't work on yourself.
And I would argue that Marxism is specific is good because it's the only one that's actually kind of true, which is the reason you feel so bad, probably, if you're someone in the modern world who isn't, in the 1%, is because of the people in the 1% and the way things are set up, because we don't have resources distributed fairly. So people talk about like capitalism and socialism and communism as like forms of government, and I don't think that's a good word for it. I think the better word for it is forms of distributing goods.
Oh,
that's
interesting.
all it is.
It's like a business plan almost.
Well, I mean, honestly, one of them, capitalism is a business plan, and that the point of a business is, to grow and expand, and communism is, there's
but
no
not
business,
necessarily.
it's just,
I don't think every business is, that's because we're limited in our capitalist view. There are businesses that have more of a functional purpose, like to stay afloat and do a functional need. Like there's a lot of government businesses that do that.
That's why, well, a government. See, there's three things here, right? There's businesses, then there's like just the government, which just is anything. But that's communism. The government being funded to serve a purpose that isn't for profit is that's all communism is. Non-profits are somewhere in the middle, and actually, I think they're a really good way of looking at why this shit doesn't work.
But they get exploited all the time.
Well, they just functionally can't work because they have to keep. You have to expand as a business to fucking pay everyone, and like they eat like half the money. Like you're just paying for them to make lanyards and shit. All this money. Also, the other thing is, anytime like a rich celebrity on Twitter is like getting attacked for being blatantly rich and gross about it, they're always like, "I give money to nonprofits. I donate money." Right? Well, Bill Gates does that a lot, right? Bill Gates always says, "Oh, we have this foundation. We give all this money," right? And that's fine, and that's like a good Band-Aid or whatever. But like, shouldn't they just pay taxes so that we vote on where their money goes, right? They're maintaining control over where they send their money, and a lot of times those are just shell companies that they use to funnel it back into their own pockets anyway, right? So this is why left shit, redistribution of wealth, which is what commie shit is a good element to reintroduce into our government, because otherwise, you know, all this is a lot of fancy words for just saying our money that we tax on Bill Gates and all that shit should just go into us being able to go to the hospital for free, right? That's it.
Interesting.
It's not that scary.
Well, okay, wait. I want to get into Marxist, but just I'm gonna do a quick like a couple sentence summary of the Chinese Civil War, just because and then you can do the reading on your own. But just for listeners, for the background, because I actually realized I barely knew all this until recently. But you know, so forgive me if you guys know this, but China fought.
No one knows this stuff. They don't teach us it.
So, and for a reason. So China fought with the Allies in World War II, and actually the Sino-Japanese War actually started before really even Germany was involved in the World War II. Japan was invading China. So I think we loosely know this from world history, but we focus more on the Euro part of the war. So I got interested in this because I recently found out my great-grandpa in China was a major general who actually accepted the defeat of the Japanese at the end of World War II. And like that was the army that did all the rape of Nanking atrocities. So people kind of like saw him as a hero, whatever. And I just made a joke on Twitter because there's a statue of him, and I was like, I think it's cool, but I wouldn't mind if they took it down to free China. But that got me interested in learning more. But so China fought with the Allies, and that's the Kuomintang, which is the old Chinese government, the Republic of China. Then after World War II, when everybody was kind of weak because we all fought a huge war, Russia was starting to gain power. And already at that point, Russia was, they helped us win with Stalingrad and stuff, but they were sort of like a frenemy, I think, according to the, American ideals. So towards the end of this era, Russia armed like communists in China and helped that party get bigger. So China was a democracy. Then the Civil War happened, and when the Civil War happened, all the other countries kind of stayed out of it. And this goes into like othering, I think, of cultures, because I think if France was going through a civil war, I feel like a lot of the other European countries would have gotten involved. But there's this feeling that it's like China was getting big, it was getting threatening because they were getting richer and smarter and, generally threatening to the positions of some of the bigger European countries. So they, I think, secretly were happy that there's some trouble brewing. They didn't want communism to take over, but they weren't so quick to squash it. So that being said, they let the war happen. Russia helped the communists take over. But here's the thing I didn't know, and my dad told me this, so it could be propaganda, but I believe it, is that America not only didn't help China fight the Civil War, but they actually armed some of the communists to help take over, and they push for dividing China in half the way Korea is divided, to say like, why can't you guys just get along? Half of it can go to communists, half of it can go to democracy. Then, China will be weak and not as big of a threat, and also we can pat ourselves on the back and say we helped save democracy. Interesting that at that point they didn't want to fight the communists in China because they were a threat. But of course, them helping the communists actually made it so the Kuomintang lost the Civil War. They retreated to Taiwan. So that's what Taiwan is now. The government from Taiwan was recognized by the UN as Kuomintang, which is was literally China for a while until China communists got so big. I use the Star Wars reference because everyone loves Star Wars. It's like the rebels. We watch the rebels thinking they're good, but technically they're not the legitimate government. The chancellor was the legitimate government. If we're all following laws, like, it doesn't mean it's right, but that's the law, right? So the UN recognized Taiwan for a while because they were like, you guys helped us win World War II. We like you. But then they were like, China's so big now. There's a lot of pressure. It's just between you guys. We're not going to get involved. So now Taiwan's kind of faded into the background. But that's the history of it. And that's why I think it's so interesting that Trump has manipulated Americans who don't know the history to think China's responsible for coronavirus. China is bad. When China actually fought really hard to save democracy and America fucking came in and let communism win. I mean, these are broad strokes, but now we're in this weird place where we're fighting Russia and China. And we kind of honestly let that happen and wanted it to happen. So that's why, from my perspective and identity, I don't see the world as black and white, because it's kind of like my identity has changed depending on who's in charge. But I've always kind of just felt like human rights are important, and that's where I stand.
Yeah, totally. That's really interesting. Yeah, I don't really know any of that stuff, but I want to learn about it. Do you know any good books or anything, or I don't know, anything I should read?
Well, so Anne, the author I talked to, said her husband wrote one called The Black Hands of Beijing. I haven't read it yet, but she said he's also a journalist, I think, and it's all about the democratic movement in China that's been pushing since the takeover. So I haven't read it yet. I don't know if it's any good. I imagine there's not that much documentation because China was kind of limiting stuff. So a lot of it's coming out now from first-person accounts. But yeah, I don't know. I'm interested too, but that's cool. A loose... Yeah, feel free to correct me if I got anything wrong. Obviously, these are passed down from people who heard propaganda in Taiwan as well. So, okay.
Yeah, I mean, you just gotta keep all that stuff in mind when you read anything. You know, there's like a limited amount you can really be sure of what's entirely true or whatever, or what the person's motivations are. But
I want to hear about the Marxist specifics now. So, what did we get wrong? Because in my mind, you know, I just stay away from communism because they took over my country. But I know it's not true, but that's the feeling that I live with.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard. It's hard to make an argument when you're talking to somebody who's in a position like that, and I never want to be disrespectful about it because I'm not arguing for the communists that are in power in China.
Yeah. I want the ideas, the good ideas, not the bad ones.
So I mean, I guess the basics are kind of like class analysis. So. In America, right, and especially like in our circles and comedy and stuff, we somehow always seem to understand power as this thing that's like very identity based, right? So when we talk about like kind of trying to make our scene a better place and the world a better place, we always talk about like diversity and stuff like that, and how we have white supremacy in America, so we need to include more people that aren't white, and white people have all this privilege and stuff. Somehow everyone understands all this stuff, right? And all this stuff is true. But nobody ever mentions this thing called class, which is very simple, right? Some people are rich and some people are poor and some people are somewhere in the middle, and right? So, right off the bat, I mean, the first thing to understand is that, like, class privilege is a real thing. If you were born with a certain amount of money, this is foundational to understanding every other type of privilege, honestly, is like, does someone have not just money, but like wealth, right? That's going to make it, I'll tell you what radicalized me kind of in terms of being a comedian was moving to New York. I came from Texas, right? And I lived in smaller towns where everyone was just kind of working class and everyone was kind of having fun. And then I moved to New York, and I realized pretty quickly, like, I'm competing with a bunch of other people, and some of them are like, the parents pay their rent. Yeah. Some of them have never had a job because, I mean, I know somebody here who's literally like an heir. You know what I mean? Like, a fortune is funding them being a comedian, right? So I looked at all that and I went, oh, this is not a level playing field. And this is how all of America kind of works, because when people get to rocket to the top via all of that money behind them, they turn around and they say, oh, I worked really hard, right? And that's the American dream is, oh, I worked really hard and then I got what I started a business or whatever, or I got myself, a career going as a comedian. but it's a lie because it wasn't fair competition to begin with, right? So that
Well, it's
sort
not
of stuff.
empathetic, but I would argue it's not a full lie. I do think, and some of them don't work hard, but some of them really, in their mind, they worked really hard, but they haven't considered how much harder they would have to work. That's what privilege is.
Right.
So it's like when we say
Right, they
you
don't
didn't
even
work
know.
hard, they get frustrated because they're like, yeah, you don't know how fucking hard I worked. It's like, you know what? I'm gonna say, okay, you can have that. You did work hard, but you don't know how much harder you would have had to work. That's because it's like I don't want to negate their feelings of hard work, which they may actually have. But wow, if you only knew how much harder you would have to work, I don't know if you'd still be doing this.
Yeah, and I mean this is like a relative, like a totem pole. Like all of us are on it to some degree. I also don't understand how little I work in compared to someone who has worse off than me.
Yeah.
It just keeps going down and down and down like that. And so that's set up, basically because the first thing that Marx and Engels sort of like identified is the worker to boss relationship. So. What we have, you know what? Okay, there's a really, really popular piece of cinema that is a great explanation, metaphor for all this. Have you ever seen Parasite?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Multiple
Parasite's
times,
a
yeah, it's
Marxist
great.
film. Bong Joon-ho, if you read this stuff and then you watch his movies, it's like obvious. And he said as much as he said, every single one of my films is about the same thing. It's about capitalism, right? So Parasite is a movie about the myth of class mobility, and that's central to capitalism, right? Everything in America is, if you work hard, you can ascend, you can make it up the ladder and then become the guy with the rich house. And then that story is kind of like a tragedy of people trying to do that, even cheating to the extent of trying to do it. It still doesn't work, right? So like the way Marxists look at it is you're a worker, right? You work for your boss, and your boss owns the factory that you're in. And what your boss tells you is that if you work hard enough in the factory, you can eventually go start your own factory, right? Because you can save all this money. But it's inherently not true because they will always keep a proportion of the profit that they make for themselves with really no justification other than they run shit where the fuck else are you going to go, right?
Yeah.
So Marxism is a way of looking at all those like dynamics in terms of value. This is where it gets really boring and your brain starts to mold over, but it's important. So there's all these different terms for like, the value created from the actual product that you start with, your labor you put into it, and then the fact that the owner is able to sort of keep an unfair amount of the labor, right? And so if you've ever worked at like, I'll give you an example. I used to be a bartender, and I open a drink, I shake a drink or whatever, I give it to somebody, they give me a certain amount of money, then a tip. Part of it goes to me, part of it goes to the cash register, and that's just the system, right? At one point, I remember my boss introducing more and more complicated cocktails at this place I worked at, where I had to work harder to shake a thing for a full minute with an egg white in it, and then they increased how much the drink cost.
Yeah. Because
it takes longer to make, right? But I didn't get any extra money, right? And I was like, what the fuck? Why don't I get that money? I did the work, right? Well, that's because your boss owns your labor. Like they're technically just using you. And so, when you think about these things in these terms, it sort of helps you understand that like that myth is it's a lie that keeps everything kind of in place, and it's the reason that things have become stratified so bad. Because if it was if everyone was sort of become like prosperous through this situation, everyone would have more money, right? But it's because you can see in America, what the hell do we have Bernie Sanders running around yelling about? 1%. It's all become more concentrated in the top, and really. This was a question that was happening in America. People were arguing about it for a long time until Ronald Reagan came along with the trickle-down economic theory and argued. He set everything up in a way that if he was right, everyone would be rich right now.
By now,
but all the money concentrated in the top. So, like...
You're not rich, Jake.
This
is... I forgot to say I'm in a mansion. I'm actually in a Tesla that looks like a house, so...
Yeah, the new ones. They're fucking sweet. So, like... and then I guess the second part of this whole equation is what do you do about it? What do we do about the fact that we live in a society that functions this way, that makes rich people richer and poor people poorer? Well, that's when people started coming up with stuff like unions, which is a good thing, I think. You get everyone at your workplace to agree that we can, stop working until they increase working conditions or pay or whatever. That's a pretty cool tactic. Another thing that I'm really into is like the concept of like co-ops. You ever been to like a grocery store or a restaurant that's a co-op?
Yeah, someone recently proposed that in entertainment as like a radical change that I'm like, we should just have that. Like performers, especially like networks that make the content. Why don't we own a share of the network that we provide content for? Things like that.
Right.
Yeah.
So this is like a good way to fight back against this stuff I'm talking about. The disproportion is, I think it's a really good idea. And there's actually a company called Means TV that I do some stuff with right now that's like trying to become the co-op like streaming stuff. If anyone, free advertisement from Means. I think they're doing a good thing. Check them out. But yeah, so like the way that works is, there's not one boss that owns all the stuff and takes the surplus value out of the top of it, the way I was describing. Instead, everyone who works there buys in for a little bit, so everyone splits up that profit and keeps it for themselves, and it's proportional to how much work you do. That seems more fair, right?
Like that's a decentralized, this is where you, and we can't get too into this because we're starting to run out of time, so I'll just tease it. This is where you get into crossing over with my AI research, because you're kind of describing decentralized government, but how do you set that up, right? You can't trust one person to code it unless you don't. So we're not quite there yet, but we're getting closer. Neural networks, like artificial neural networks, supposedly mimic organic learning in your brain where the system adapts to the problem, as opposed to like the old version of computers was you make one formula, you plug in a thing, and then it comes out at the end. The idea that there's a nucleus and one central boss. But now we're talking about algorithms that interact with each other and learn as they get more information, and they actually adapt the question. Basically, like the question when you're all rich isn't how do we get richer, it's maybe how do we be more equal. The questions can change as the systems change, and that's what AI strives to do.
Cool.
I know, right? That's
really
why I'm so fascinated by this. I think we have a version of the future that could be really, really good if we actually get educated.
Well, that's the thing about tech, right? So like a lot of people hate tech culture in my circles anyway, and all these freaking communists and anarchists and stuff. Everyone hates it because a lot of tech is like very profit driven, and it's these libertarian guys who think that like society is very mathematical, and them creating profit will fix everything. Doesn't make any sense, right? But I think honestly, like in my mind, I want to take over. I want to go to San Francisco, steal all that shit from the tech people, and then just rewire it to be, instead of driven for profit, just for people to get around better, right?
Yeah.
So like, for example, like those not razor scooters, those like Lime scooters you see everywhere, and like they're in a bunch of cities all over the country. You put your credit card onto the damn thing, you can use a scooter to get around downtown Atlanta or whatever, right? Everyone hates those. I'm from Austin. They install them in Austin. Everyone's mad at them because they're annoying, because they charge you money to use what's essentially a free thing, right? What if that stuff was owned by the government and cities just had a way for people to get around and we all paid for it with our fucking taxes, right?
Well,
that would make so much more sense.
I have a third, even more advanced, we're not quite there yet, but is version that would solve both of those problems. And this is where I think tech is headed, and nobody in Silicon Valley is letting us know yet because it's profitable to keep their IP. I think the technology has gotten so advanced that we actually have a way of making a better future that right now that we're not using. So those scooters are not there to make your money. Like, let's be honest, every single technology company right now is in the data business. So here's what it should be. Every citizen, tax-paying citizen, gets a free scooter. And this is where the right, who doesn't know how advanced the technology goes, will be like, what are you talking about? Socialism? Communism? No, because actually there's intrinsic value. If every single person used that scooter and we agreed to give our GPS data but not our identifying human data to the central location that like charges it, we're generating literal data value by using these scooters that we ride around for free, get to where we're going for free. This is where we are, and this is where I start to sound tinfoil hat, but this is my whole push has been to like let people know that technology exists. We are there now, and someone is making that money on your data, and it's not you. And it's not a bad thing. Like, there's a version of the future where we all, like, I don't know if I would do this, but where we all sign up to, like, let's say you make $20,000 a year just from agreeing to share your data with a company that is in the data collection business. They just give you a check, and all you're doing is agreeing to like, let them track your, GPS. I mean, obviously you'd have to toggle with privacy, but like, we're here. This is the kind of money that's being made in Silicon Valley. They don't want your money. They don't want your subscription fees. They want your data. So everything should be free because it's not free. They're making money. That's where we are now. And that's like, to me, the marriage of these two ideas of like, well, who's going to pay for it? You're generating money by living. What if leisure could generate money? What if you playing tennis is generating movement data? It's generating data on how to play better tennis that you could sell to, sporting good companies. That's where we are.
Yeah, it's weird. A lot of people have a problem with that because that is honestly very similar to what they do in communist China in terms of tracking people's data and stuff. If it's maybe not,
but they don't distribute that.
I don't know.
They're not distributing that. You need to own the revenue that you're making.
I would do that in a second because I do not care if the government knows about what kind of porn I watch or whatever. Any of the stuff people are freaking out. I don't care. I don't care not. I'm an open book. I'm a comedian, right? Track everything. If the government wants to kill me, they can kill me anyway. Like, they know where I live. You know what I mean? We were talking about that earlier. Everyone knows where I live. But I don't know. A lot of people seem like they would be against that. I would totally do it, though.
But I'm saying that they're doing that. I'm not saying that it's a choice. Right now, it's not a choice. People are selling their... Yes. I'm not saying that we would all agree. I don't know if I would agree, but I don't agree now, and they're doing it. So I just don't think people are aware of how much money is being generated in the data business. Like, it's insane, and it's also the reason why... I don't know. It's the right knows that, though, and that's why they're really pushing for us to not know info. But yeah, sorry. This is all stuff that gets me really excited, but I'm the one who's getting you off topic. Sorry.
No. I'm hella interested. That's really cool. I want to know more.
Well, let's wrap up with, I'm sure we can always continue talking, but for the pod, let's wrap up with, okay, I'll ask you this question and you can answer if you want. If you could start a new society and, let go of what the labels are, Marxist or capitalist, whatever, just Jake Flores' society, what are, let's give you, because one rule is hard. Let's say what are your top 3 rules that everyone would have to follow. It could also be no rules. No magic is allowed. Okay. Because sometimes it goes into magic world. Yeah.
I mean, let's see. So I'm struggling to not just copy straight from like.
Sure, it could just be copied. That's fine.
Well, I mean, the first one, it's going to sound worse than it is, but no private property, right? And the thing is, when people say that, Republicans a lot of times will freak out and they'll go, "Oh my God, this guy wants to come take your house or whatever, right? Or he wants to take all your property or whatever." That's a communist concept or a socialist concept, right? It doesn't mean that you don't get to keep your house. What it means is you don't get to own your house and then charge someone else to live in it at an exorbitant rate that keeps them in wage slavery. You know what I mean? Because like most of us rent, right? So we're in a shitty situation because someone else is just charging us money to live in a home. Doesn't make any sense. No. If I get to restart society, everyone just gets a freaking house, right? Yeah. And if we need new ones, we just build them together, pool the money we use. That's it, right?
That's nature. You're describing nature. Birds just build a nest. They don't have to pay rent. Exactly,
like animals, right? And so there's an anarchist, Peter Kropotkin, who made kind of the same argument. He lived around the same time as Freud. Or not Freud, Darwin. But Darwin, Darwin says, "Oh, we come from these vicious animals that fought each other and stuff." Kropotkin says, "No. We're more like beavers. We build stuff together. We're like birds. We fly in a V together." I think like that. I think we're more like that than people realize. So,
okay, what's the next
rule? Is be an animal, like Kropotkin said.
Okay. Good
Everyone
rule.
picks their own animal house, like in Game of Thrones, which I'm a big fan of.
That's kind of got kung fu movie vibes. Like you learn styles of you can learn. Yeah. Okay, that's pretty good. I like that. I like that you're, bringing in my culture there. Okay, what's the third one?
I guess I should do one that's just completely for fun. The third rule is, you know, don't work too hard, buddy. Take it easy.
I like
TGIF.
that. I like that you think it's for fun, but that is actually so important. Balance is important. Okay, so that's your utopia society.
Rule number 3 is you have a great goddamn day.
Yeah,
You know?
yeah, that's really nice. I like that. Okay, I would live there. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for sharing this. I know there's so much more I'm sure we could talk about, but I'm going to cut it off because of time and our listeners' time. But we can always catch up another time.
I have to stop myself when I start going off on this shit. I could go all day and I have to get shit done. So we should.
Is there anything you want to
chill.
promote? I mean, definitely you guys should check out Jake's podcast. I'm going to listen to a few eps now. I feel like I want to hear more. But yeah, anything else?
Yeah, I mean, so my podcast is called Pod Damn America, and it's me and 2 other comics who are just into, left organizing and stuff, who are comedians, and, daily show with better politics is how I would pitch it, right? My other show, I have a second podcast I do with a booker / anthropologist friend of mine named Luisa Diaz.
Oh, yeah, I know Luisa. She's great.
Yeah, me and Luisa have a show where we get kind of more into like looking at modern pieces of like culture, like stand-up comedy or movies or whatever, and then relaying it back to the Kropotkin and the Foucault and all that crazy shit. And I don't know, just talk about the kind of the theory and the politics of the scene. Those are my 2 main things. And my @ is Feral Jokes on everything. It's an anagram for my name. I'm on Twitter a lot. That's probably it. I mean, at some point, if stand-up ever comes back, I do that too. But this is the podcast.
Thank you. You can follow this podcast at Tell Me Anything Pod. Follow me at Larissa T on Twitter and Instagram. Thanks, Jake.